Alright guys, welcome to this drill-based session. Before we actually move into the drills and the sets of questions, let's first just briefly have a little bit of an overview of exactly what it is we dealt with throughout Unit 2. So to summarize in terms of the tool, the two basic elements of setting up the tool that we are going to utilize throughout this course is number one, obviously the rotation factor. Okay, and within that rotation factor we spoke about two different types of rotations. The first was a bar type rotation, which is predominantly a time-based rotation, and then the second was the point and figure. Now, once we spoke about our rotation, we then moved on to looking at the different types of source footprints we can create, and we had 5 different footprint sources. The first obviously was the delta. The second was the volume. The third was the imbalance source. The fourth was the profile source. And lastly, we spoke about the most important one, which was the bid times ask source. Now, most importantly, guys, as I mentioned, throughout this course and all the examples, we are going to utilize both sets of rotations for different strategies. In terms of the source, we are predominantly going to focus on the bid times by ask, as well as develop a specific strategy utilizing the imbalance. Now, just to note, the reason we don't utilize the delta, volume, and profile is very simply because you can get all of that information within the bid times by ask source. Okay, so that's what we dealt with in Unit 2. So you should now have your chart set up. Everything should look relatively easy to utilize. You should be able to move between the different markets quite easily. Last but not least, I really want to ensure that you can not just utilize the tool, but also that you understand the intricacy behind the tool. And that's what this drill is all about. It's going to test that you actually understand what it is you're exactly seeing in that footprint tool. Okay, so obviously if this is simple, it should be simple. If it is simple, great. That means you understand the basics of the tool. That's fine, brilliant. Move on to Unit 3. If, however, you're still struggling a little bit trying to understand the tool, then this will be a perfect drill session. So straight into it. Question number 1. Or as you can see on the left side here, I've got a hypothetical footprint. So this is our footprint on the left, and on the right side we've got the prices. Now, I want you to answer the following question. So question number 1. What is the volume traded at each price? So tell me, what is the total volume traded at each price? Question number 2. What is the delta traded at each price? Is it positive or negative? Question number 3. Which color should each price be? So if you were to color in each one of these prices, 40, 41, 40, 41, 42, 43, what color would it be, red or blue? Question number 4. Which shade should each price be? Now remember, we spoke about the number of shades and how that is the relative amount of volume traded at each price. So go and put each one of those prices in either a light shade, a medium shade, or a dark shade. Now just again, to cast your memory back, is that there's only 2 colors that it can be, that's red and blue. And from each one of those colors, you're going to have a light, a medium, and a dark shade. Okay, question number 5. What is the cumulative delta over these 6 prices? And question number 6. Identify the imbalances between prices. Okay, I'm going to give you a little tip there. It's diagonal in nature. So again, if you don't get this, that's okay. I will do a guided tuition session with you after this. And your bonus question, and I don't know if I've mentioned this, but if you do get this right, congratulations. But what does the 0 represent at price 42? So what does that 0 represent at price 42? Pause this video now, take a moment, go through those questions, think about it, and when you come back and you start playing again, I'm going to go through each answer individually. Right guys, so back into it now. Let's move straight on to the answers. I hope you found that useful. The first thing is, what is the volume traded at each price? So very simply, as we spoke about, the total volume is simply what was traded or what was sold at price 45 versus what was bought at price 45. And we can see the sum total of volume is none other than 1,100 contracts. In the second example, we can see it's very simply 710 contracts. We then have 367 contracts, then 650, then 1,030, and lastly 1,350. Okay, nice and straightforward. Hopefully you got that right. Now the next thing is, what is the delta at each price? So to get the delta, you simply subtract the two from each other. So 300 in the first example, except you now need to add either a positive or a negative delta. So remember, the delta is merely the interaction, or who won the battle at that price. So in the first example, we can see there was more buying at 45 than there was selling. Therefore, it will be a positive 300 delta. And likewise for the next, the buyers won this price again, and it was positive 190 delta. We then have minus 145 delta as the sellers won price 43. We then have positive 650 delta, positive 870 delta, and last but not least, negative 650 delta. Okay, so straight away you can see obviously that the delta varies at each price. Now, the next step was, which color should each price be, either red or blue? Now, the color just simply shows us whether it was buyers who won at that price or sellers who won at that price. So when the color is red, obviously the sellers won, and when the color is blue, the buyers won. Okay, and by one we mean there was a positive impact on the delta. Okay, so very clearly, very easily, we got a blue, a red, a blue, and a red. Okay, and then the next question is, what should each shade be at each price? Now, this, okay, again, if you found this a little bit tricky, that's okay. Important thing to understand is that the shades are based on the relative amount of volume. Okay, so an algorithm is designed effectively to go and add a shade based on the relative volume. So it's one price's volume relative to the next. The price that has the darkest color will ultimately have the most amount of volume versus the lighter. So if I was to draw this on a scale, it's simply just the least amount of volume toward the most amount of volume. So the darker the shade, the higher the volume at a price, and obviously counter, the lower the volume, the lighter the price. Okay, so again, if we were to put this into a shade, it's very simple. We can see the volume traded, the total volume, and we can simply see that the highest volume is 1,350. Therefore, that will be a very dark shade. We can also see that, relatively speaking, 1,100 is a relatively dark shade. On the flip side, we can see that 367 is a relatively low volume relative to all the other prices, therefore it will get a light shade. In between, we have got obviously a medium shade with 650 and 710, and obviously then 1,030 we could pretty much interpret as a dark shade as well. So that's how you would see the shades. It's based on the total of volume. Note obviously, the higher the amount of volume traded at a price, obviously the darker the shade, and likewise the lighter will be allocated to the lower relative volume. Alright then, what is the cumulative delta? So very simple. To get the cumulative delta, you just go and add up all of these prices together, and you will find out over this series of 6 prices within this rotation, we can very clearly see that the buyers have won this rotation and they've had a net impact or a net positive impact on the market in this rotation. Alright, then lastly, identify the imbalances between prices. Now, again, don't worry too much about this. We will spend quite a bit of time on this when we move on to imbalance strategy. But very simply, we can see there are some imbalances, and this is definitely one of them. Now remember, imbalances always go in that direction, not in the opposite direction. And the imbalance is none other than when there's a really big relative difference between buyers buying a price versus sellers selling a price. So we can see buyers bought 650 at 42, versus sellers selling only 80 at 41. As a result, there's a really big imbalance between how much was sold at the best price, at the best bid, versus how much was bought at the best offer. Okay, and obviously an imbalance, obviously, one man's imbalance might be another man's, non-imbalance. So it's important, and we will talk about this later on, to distinguish how much is an imbalance. But as a basic rule of thumb, I like to work on, numbers, anything 5 times, okay, so 5x, anything that's 5 times, for me would be considered an imbalance. So straight away we can see no imbalance there, an imbalance there, potential imbalance there, no imbalance, and no imbalance. So if you got the answer right, that was the imbalance, congratulations. Okay, then to answer the bonus question, very simply, what does the 0 represent at price 42? It's very simple, guys. And again, don't stress too much about this. I don't think I went over it with you guys just yet. But a 0 represents a little bit of stops. Okay, so you all know what stops are. You know what they look like. You get annoyed when you get stopped out. But when there's a 0, effectively what it's telling us is that as the market began to move either up or down, it skipped completely over this price. In other words, there was no single selling going into the 42s at any point. Okay, so what it's saying is that once the market started to go back up the page, obviously the buyers were so aggressive, so intentional to get bought that ultimately they very quickly skipped over this price, that sellers were not able to even sell a single contract at price 42. All right, guys. Thank you for joining for this drill-based session. I hope you've got a much better understanding now of the basic elements of the footprint. Again, we're going to move into Unit 3 now. We're going to start talking about very specific principles on the footprint. And again, once we do that, you're going to start to recognize how powerful the footprint tool is. Good luck, and I'll see you again in Unit 3.